I inherited a $90 million mansion from my parents, but my greedy mother-in-law had other plans. She demanded I sell it for her business. When I refused, she showed up with her son, tied up the security guard, and set my home ablaze. They thought they'd won, but the next morning, I hit them with a shocking revenge they could never have imagined. My name is Lena Harrison, and if you'd asked me a year ago where I saw my life going, I would have told you everything was perfect. I was 32, a successful event planner in Austin, Texas. I had a job I loved, friends I cherished, and a marriage I believed in. My parents, both self-made millionaires, had given me everything I needed to build a secure future. And when they passed away unexpectedly, I thought I could continue honoring their legacy while building my own life. When I inherited their estate, which included a $90 million luxury mansion, I felt like I was living in a dream. It was more than just a home. It was the product of their hard work and sacrifice, a symbol of their love for me. I could still feel their presence in every corner of that house. It was overwhelming, yes, but it was also an opportunity to truly begin a new chapter in my life. My husband, Dylan, and I had always talked about moving into a bigger home one day, but nothing could have prepared us for the reality of what was about to unfold. Dylan was 34, a real estate agent who was thrilled about the prospect of living in such a luxurious mansion. When we moved in, it felt like our lives were finally coming together. We spent days decorating the grand rooms and evenings strolling through the lush gardens, savoring the peace of our new life. For a while, it felt like nothing could disrupt our happiness. But it didn't take long for the first cracks to appear. Dylan's mother, Margaret, was a woman who'd never hidden her opinions. At 58, she had always been a constant presence in our lives, critical, demanding, and often overbearing. I thought I'd be able to manage her, but I couldn't have been more wrong. From the moment Margaret learned about the mansion, something in her shifted. Her words were kind at first, full of praise, but there was an undercurrent of something darker. She began to make remarks about how lucky I was and how the house would be wasted on one person. At first, I didn't think much of it, but soon, the comments became more direct. "Lena, you know," she said one afternoon as she casually visited, sipping tea, "I've always believed in good investments. With all that money, you could really expand your reach. Real estate is such a profitable business. I don't know why you're holding on to that mansion." I was taken aback. I had just lost both my parents, and this house was all I had left to remind me of them. It wasn't just about money, it was about honoring their memory. "I'm not ready to sell, Margaret," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. "This place means a lot to me." She raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I get it, Lena. But you do realize that selling it and investing in something else would set you up for life, right? Think about it. Real estate, the right property, the right business. It could change everything." I could feel my stomach tighten, but I tried not to show it. "I'm not interested, Margaret. I'm happy here." But Margaret was persistent. Every time we spoke, the conversation veered back to the house. It was clear she didn't understand why I wouldn't simply sell it and use the money for something better. She grew more insistent, and that's when I started to feel the pressure. It wasn't just her anymore. Dylan, my husband, began to show signs of being influenced by his mother's ideas. He would sit quietly during our discussions, his silence growing louder with every passing day. I tried to brush it off at first, telling myself that it was just a phase. After all, Dylan had always been supportive. He had been my rock through all the struggles with my parents' passing. But as the days went on, I began to wonder if his loyalties were shifting. One day, Margaret and her younger son, Max, showed up at our door unannounced. I knew immediately something was wrong. Margaret's eyes were too bright, too focused, and Max, who was only 26, had an expression that mirrored his mother's, impatience and hidden anger. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Margaret didn't even greet me. She walked straight into the living room and, without preamble, said, "Lena, I've had enough of this. The house is a waste. You need to sell it and use that money wisely. I'm tired of waiting for you to make the right decision." I was stunned. "Margaret, this house is not for sale. This isn't about the money, it's about keeping my parents' legacy alive. I won't just give it up because you think it's a waste." She smiled coldly, and for the first time, I saw something dark in her eyes. "You think you're the only one who can benefit from this inheritance? You think your parents would want you to hoard it? No, Lena. It's time to let go." Before I could respond, Max stepped forward, looking at me with a coldness that sent a chill down my spine. "Mom's right," he said. "You're being stubborn. This could be a huge opportunity for all of us. Why hold on to something that just sits there, wasting away?" I felt the walls closing in, the weight of their words crushing me. "This isn't about money," I said again, my voice firm. "I'm not selling. This house is mine, and it means something to me." Margaret's smile faltered for just a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "Fine," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "But don't think I'll forget this." And just like that, she and Max left, but I had a feeling in my gut that this wasn't the end. I didn't know it at the time, but I was about to learn the true depths of betrayal and the cost of standing my ground. What happened next would change everything. I wish I could say I was wrong about Margaret, that I overreacted. But what happened next confirmed all of my fears. I thought the worst was behind me, but in reality, it had only just begun. It was a regular afternoon, or at least I thought it was. Dylan and I were settling into our new life, still getting used to the mansion. I was upstairs working on some event plans, trying to keep busy. I didn't expect anything unusual, but then I heard a loud knock on the door. My heart skipped a beat. Margaret rarely came by unless she had something to say, and her tone the last time we spoke made it clear that she was not going to let this go. I answered the door, only to find Margaret standing there, her face flushed with anger. She didn't say hello.
She didn't ask how I was.
She simply stormed past me, her eyes locked on the mansion as if she was ready to tear it down with her gaze alone. "What are you doing here, Margaret?" I asked, my voice growing tense. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she called out to Max, who had been hiding behind the large columns of the porch. Max stepped forward, and that's when I knew something was wrong. They weren't just here to talk. "Margaret, what is this about?" I asked again, feeling a sense of dread growing in the pit of my stomach. "Everything, Lena," she finally said, her voice hard. "You've made a huge mistake by not listening to me. I gave you a chance, but now you're forcing my hand." Before I could ask what she meant, a loud sound came from behind me, followed by the unmistakable crackle of fire. I whipped around in shock and disbelief. Margaret and Max were standing there, a lighter in Max's hand, and the flames were starting to spread on the edge of the mansion's beautiful porch. My breath caught in my throat. "What are you doing?" I screamed. "This is the only way, Lena," Margaret said coldly. "You're not listening, so we'll make you." My heart pounded in my chest.
They were setting the house on fire.
Not just any fire, but an intentional one, meant to destroy everything that my parents had worked for, everything I had inherited. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what to do. My thoughts were racing as I watched the flames begin to spread, licking at the edges of the mansion, hungry and fast. My first instinct was to call for help, but I had to do something more. Something to stop them from completely ruining everything. I turned quickly, my mind snapping into survival mode. The mansion had security cameras and a guard who was usually stationed at the front gate. I ran to the living room and grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I started recording the scene. I knew I had to capture everything, especially since I could see Dylan standing in the background, his face a mask of indecision. As I panned the camera, I saw the security guard tied to a chair, his mouth gagged, unable to stop the arsonists. That was when the full weight of the betrayal hit me. My own husband, my partner, was standing there doing nothing. Dylan wasn't even trying to stop his mother or brother. He wasn't trying to protect the house. He was complicit. I could feel the tears threatening to spill, but I held them back. I wasn't going to let them see my weakness. I wasn't going to let them break me. In a flash, I made a decision. I ran to the back of the house and released my trained attack dogs. I knew they would be my only chance to force them to stop. The dogs were well trained to respond to threats, and I trusted them more than anyone else at that moment. As soon as Margaret and Max saw the dogs running toward them, their faces went pale with fear. Without a word, they both turned and bolted, running as fast as they could, leaving the fire to rage on in the background. It was surreal, almost as if it were all happening in slow motion. I heard the dogs barking loudly, chasing after them, but it was too late. The fire had already taken hold. I dialed 911, but by the time help arrived, it was already too late. Half of the mansion had been consumed by flames. I stood there, watching the destruction unfold, my mind spinning. I couldn't comprehend what was happening. This was no accident. It was a deliberate attempt to destroy everything that had been left to me. But the worst part was realizing that Dylan had been part of this. He had stood there, watching, doing nothing to stop his mother and brother. They had all betrayed me, my own family. The days that followed were a blur of chaos. The police arrived, and I was able to give them the evidence I had recorded. But Margaret, Max, and Dylan had already disappeared. They had gone underground, evading the authorities. I couldn't believe it. My own husband had chosen to stand with his mother and brother over me. I didn't know what to do. I felt lost, heartbroken, and angry. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not after everything I had lost. I hired a lawyer, gathered all the evidence I had, and vowed to make them pay. I would get justice for my parents, for the mansion, and for myself. I wasn't going to let their greed and betrayal win. But little did I know, the worst was yet to come. The days after the fire felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The mansion was destroyed, my life was in chaos, and the betrayal was too much to bear. But I wasn't going to let it end there. I had to do something. I had to fight back. I called a lawyer, Mr. Thomas Anderson, a calm and experienced man who specialized in property disputes and fraud. The moment I met him, I knew he was the right person to handle my case. He listened to my story with patience, and as I showed him the videos and photos of the fire, he nodded gravely. "We can use this evidence," he said after a long pause, "but we need to gather more. If they're trying to run from the law, we need to be quick." He was right. As much as I wanted to focus on the emotional side of things, I knew I needed to build a solid case. We compiled every piece of evidence, phone recordings, photos of the security guard tied up, and any traces of their involvement. I knew my husband Dylan's role in all of this was undeniable, but I wasn't sure where they had gone. Dylan, Margaret, and Max had vanished without a trace, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were planning something else. Something worse. The police had been notified immediately after the fire, but they were having trouble locating any of them. It seemed like they had all gone underground. They were smart, too smart for me to catch alone. I couldn't help but feel helpless. My own family had betrayed me, and now they were hiding, slipping away, without facing any consequences. I was restless. Every day, I checked the news and the police reports, hoping for a breakthrough. I even went to the mansion site once, looking at the burned remnants of my parents' home, the place where so many memories had been created. It was painful, but I couldn't allow myself to mourn just yet. There was something more important to focus on: revenge. No, not just revenge. Justice. 1 week later, the breakthrough finally came. I received a call from Mr. Anderson early in the morning. His voice was steady but urgent. "Lena, they've been found. Your husband, mother-in-law, and brother-in-law were arrested this morning at the airport. They were trying to leave the country," he said. For a moment, I felt the weight of the words hit me. I could hardly believe it. They had tried to escape, to flee from what they had done, but they couldn't get away. The police had tracked them down just in time, and now they were facing serious charges. I didn't know whether to feel relief or anger. But in that moment, I realized that this was my chance to make them pay for everything they had taken from me. They had destroyed my parents' legacy and betrayed me in the worst possible way. Now they had to face the consequences. The charges were severe: arson, conspiracy, and property destruction, among others. I could hardly stand to think of my husband's involvement in all of this. I had trusted him, and he had thrown it all away. But there was no time for self-pity. I had to focus on the court case ahead. The trial was intense. I testified about everything: how Margaret and Max had set the fire, how I had captured the evidence on my phone, how Dylan had stood by and let it all happen. They denied it at first, but the evidence was irrefutable. In the end, the court ruled in my favor. Dylan, Margaret, and Max were ordered to sell their properties and compensate me for the loss of the mansion. But their punishment didn't end there. The court handed down prison sentences, and they were forced to face the consequences of their greed and betrayal. It wasn't the end I had imagined, but it was justice. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief. They had been caught, and I had done what was right. But little did I know, this was just the beginning of my journey to reclaim my life. The aftermath of the trial was nothing like I imagined. I thought the verdict would give me closure, but instead, it left me with a bitter taste in my mouth. Justice had been served, but I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. Dylan, the man I had once loved and trusted, was now a stranger. My own family, my mother-in-law and brother-in-law, had turned on me, and the house, the beautiful mansion that had been my parents' legacy, was gone. It wasn't just bricks and mortar that I had lost, it was the symbol of everything they had worked for. But as the days passed, I began to realize something important. I had won. I had fought back. I had stood strong, even when the people I loved the most had tried to tear me down. I wasn't just the victim of their betrayal anymore, I was the woman who had survived it. I had reclaimed my life, my power, and my future. And now it was time to build something new. I used the compensation money from the court order to make a fresh start. I didn't need another mansion. I didn't need to replace what was lost. Instead, I invested in myself. I focused on my career as an event planner, something I had always loved but hadn't had the time for while my life was consumed by the drama of the inheritance. I hired a new team and worked on some of the most exciting events of my career, finding satisfaction in helping others create moments that would last a lifetime. But more than that, I poured my energy into healing. I surrounded myself with people who cared about me, friends who had supported me through the toughest parts of my journey. They reminded me of who I was before all the chaos, the strong, independent woman who had a passion for life. I reconnected with old friends and even made new ones, rediscovering parts of myself that had been buried beneath the weight of the betrayal. I didn't forget the pain. I couldn't. But I learned how to live with it. I took the lessons I had learned from my parents about resilience, about standing tall no matter what life threw at you, and I applied them to every area of my life. The mansion might have been destroyed, but I realized that it wasn't the house that made me who I was. It was my strength, my ability to rise from the ashes. One evening, as I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, modest yet peaceful, I looked out over the city skyline, the soft glow of the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I felt a sense of calm wash over me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. I thought about everything I had lost and everything I had gained. The pain of losing my parents, the betrayal of my own family, the destruction of the mansion, it all seemed so distant now. I had emerged from it all stronger, more self-assured, and ready to face whatever came next. The people who had betrayed me, Dylan, Margaret, Max, they were gone from my life. They were paying the price for their greed and deceit. But I didn't feel the anger anymore. I felt a sense of freedom. I was no longer defined by the actions of others. I was in control of my own story, and I would write the next chapter on my own terms. I moved forward, not forgetting what had happened, but using it as fuel to create a life that was mine, one built on my own hard work, integrity, and resilience. I may have lost my parents' mansion, but I gained something far more valuable: my independence, my peace, and the knowledge that no matter how deep the betrayal, I had the power to rise above it. As the sun set that evening, I realized I was ready for whatever came next. I had survived the worst, and now I could embrace the future with open arms. No longer weighed down by the past, I felt lighter, freer, and more confident than ever. This was my new beginning, and I was ready to live it.